We open and welcome to the ancestral people of this land, acknowledging that our church, like all of Burke, rests in the unceded territory of the Manahoac people of the Great Sioux Nation. We seek healing and the realization of justice with the people of this land who live on and their descendants, the present-day members of the Monacan Indian Nation, the Patawomic Indian Tribe of Virginia, and the Piscataway Indian Nation. We honor the ancestors as we move toward healing so that all together shall one day know full justice.
Welcome to Accotink Unitarian Universalist Church. I am Nancy Melito. My pronouns are she, her, and I am happy to be your worship associate today. Whether you're a longtime member or a newcomer or something in between, we encourage you to stay for our social hour online and in person immediately after this service, and you'll be able to talk with our Reverend William Lovewood. We're so delighted you decided to join us today. Welcome.
I know you just sat down, but if I can invite you to rise in body or in spirit and join in reciting our chalice lighting words, which are from our new UU values. They're an abbreviated version of that altogether. Love is at the center of Unitarian Universalism. Love is the practice of our living tradition. As Unitarian Universalists, we covenant to help everyone flourish with dignity, honor the web of life, be beloved community, cultivate generosity, celebrate diversity, transform the world. We have those words also on bookmarks that I think we should get back in. We used to put those in the hymnals so that those of you in the back, I saw some of you were, okay, so you can also, maybe I just need to mention, you can also use those to follow along and recite along, since I know it's hard to see. We are going to get that mounted at some point higher up so that everybody can see that. So this month, our theme is story. And last Sunday, as an example of exploring story, I shared a 7 songs musical memoir. And I hope that for those of you who are here, that inspired you to reflect on your life story as a sacred story with its different eras, we could say, revealing their wisdom to you. My story was shared just as an example. And on the 4th Sunday, so 2 Sundays from now, on the 4th Sunday of this month, participants in our UU Writers Soul Matters group will share stories from their lives, each sharing a story from one era or an important moment in their life, to give you another example to reflect on, or more examples to reflect on, of how our stories can be looked at like sacred scripture, like sacred stories with much wisdom and meaning to reveal to us. Next Sunday, we'll look at the life and teachings of Martin Luther King Jr. as we do every year. But I think they're especially important this year in helping us to traverse through this difficult moment in our nation's history. Our nation is in a period of disruption yet again, and we need the wisdom of Martin Luther King Jr. to help us remember how to get through and how to get our nation back to fidelity with the best in our national foundation story. So we'll explore that next Sunday in a multi-generational service. Today, we're going to look at our UU foundational story. And as I shared last Sunday briefly, I don't think we do a very good job of telling this story. I don't even think we do a good job of knowing what our foundational story is. And that's okay. We're a young faith. I was once asked if I thought Unitarian Universalism was dying, to which I responded, I think that Unitarian Universalism is in the process of being born. The Unitarian Universalist traditions merged in 1961. That's extremely young in terms of world religions. And even if we look further back, as a movement, we're only about 200 or 250 years old. So I think it's okay that we don't necessarily know what our foundational story is, but I also think it's important that we explore that. So I'm going to explore that this Sunday with you. And I've been thinking about it for some time, but my version, my idea of what that story is not definitive, nor is it completely fleshed out. It's a work in progress, that's for sure. I do know that it starts with a robust welcome, because it takes all of us to make our UU story sing, to make that story come to life.
So today I have a story about penguins. Penguins have the power of we. This story is by Reverend Marisol Caballero from the Families Weave a Tapestry of Faith, Summer 2019. In Antarctica, emperor penguin dads, with their young tucked snugly under them, waddle into tightly packed huddles to keep warm during the coldest months. While the female penguins are on the long voyage for food, the male penguins must endure a climate so harsh that Ted Scambos of the National Snow and Ice Data Center of the University of Colorado Boulder told National Geographic that it's a place where Earth is so close to its limit of coldness, it's almost like another planet. Well, like all of us, these penguins must make the best of their circumstances and find ways to thrive. Also similar to people, the only way emperor penguins thrive is in a community. They shuffle while they huddle, in spectacular group movements that look like dances. To ensure that none remain on the toasty inside of the huddle, nor on the cold outside of the huddle for too long. Believe it or not, the penguins are in danger, both individually and collectively, if any get too warm or too cold. Similarly, our human family suffers, individually and collectively, when forces of power and privilege shuffle the same folks to the margins or disconnect them from community, time and time again. Think about your community. Who gets support and resources? Is it the same people all the time? Might you have spent too much time in the warm center? Could this be harming your family or someone else? Now, normally, human family communities don't always choreograph ourselves for equity and common good. We at Accotink work to do this, like when we host our hypothermia shelter next month. Which families, there's a night just for you. Check the newsletter. But when some choose not to shuffle or move, or when some are frozen by fear or circumstance, truthfully, we endure harsh conditions in this world. A well-choreographed huddle is crucial. So shuffle on, human family. Shuffle on.
Today's reading is by Marge Piercy, and it is titled, Connections Are Made Slowly. Connections are made slowly, Sometimes they grow underground. You cannot always tell by looking what is happening. More than half a tree is spread out in the soil under your feet. Penetrate quietly as the earthworm that blows no trumpet. Fight persistently as the creeper that brings down the tree. Spread like the squash plant that overruns the garden. Gnaw in the dark and use the sun to make sugar. Weave real connections, create real nodes, build real houses. Live a life you can endure. Make life that is loving. Keep tangling and interweaving and taking more in, a thicket and bramble. Wilderness to the outside, but to us, it is interconnected with rabbit runs and burrows and lairs. This is how we are going to live for a long time. Not always. For every gardener knows that after the digging, after the planting, after the long season of tending and growth, the harvest comes.
So we may or may not have one foundational story, but we certainly have liturgy. That reading can be found in our hymnal, and I've used it, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And a lot of our foundationalness can be found in our hymnal, both in the songs we sing and in readings. And those songs and readings come from multiple sources, from science and from great thinkers of many eras and from the world's diverse religious traditions. One of the wonderful things about the fact that we draw from multiple sources is that we can make use of foundational stories from other traditions. So I want to start by sharing a little bit about some of those stories. So in Buddhism, the foundational story, as I see it at least, is that of the wise, tranquil Buddha who has found his way beyond suffering. In particular, in my spiritual life, I find this comforting when I lack wisdom and a sense of peacefulness, when I can't see or even imagine a way to tranquility. I just say to myself, well, at least somebody got there. At least the Buddha did it, so I know that it's doable and that this too shall pass. Now, that story of the Buddha historically evolves and changes. It's still the critical story for some traditions in Buddhism, but a new idea of the bodhisattva arises as someone who sticks around and suffers for the sake of others. A Buddha that is more deeply and actively invested in the well-being of others, and also less singular. When the bodhisattva appears in the Buddhist tradition, now there's multiple bodhisattvas who remain in the realm of suffering to help guide others. This is also, I just want to add, rooted in the story of the historical Buddha who didn't ascend into some kind of heaven once he found awakening, but established monastic communities and taught in order to help others find their way beyond suffering as well. Now, in Judaism and in Christianity, one of the core foundational stories is that of the journey to the Promised Land. Now, I think it's really a stroke of genius that in the yearly cycle of reading the Torah, the 5 books of Moses in Judaism, the people never reach the Promised Land. That the story ends, the 5th book of Moses ends before that, and then you return to the beginning, to the creation story all over again. I think there's so much wisdom in this because I think it makes the Promised Land not a place, but a way of being together. a utopian ideal that is always, always just beyond our reach, not because it's unrealistic, but because our vision expands. The promised land that one generation gets to is not the promised land of the next generation. It's always changing and growing. This is evident in Martin Luther King Jr.'s use of the story of the Promised Land, particularly highlighted in his final speech, where he shares that he, like Moses in that 5th book, will not reach the Promised Land, but instead only see it from the mountaintop. I think that's actually true for all of us. May each of us be fortunate enough to see a promised land for those who come after us, on the verge of becoming, in part because of our actions. A world that is better than the world we inherited from our ancestors, a better story than we found ourselves in when we entered this world. Now, the larger Torah, beyond the 5 books of Moses, does include the book of Joshua. That's the part of the story where the people do reach the promised land, and they find it already inhabited, but since promised to the people by God, free to be claimed by violent conquest. Now, unfortunately, we've seen this story reenacted. I think we continue to see it reenacted, but most clearly we've seen it reenacted in our own American history. A violent, God-ordained, manifest destiny that inspired European Americans to conquer North America and the rest of the Americas as well. And more largely, the entire project of colonialism, which is in many ways still ongoing, definitely ongoing in the ripples from the past that continue to be waves and then to become hurricanes, but also in ongoing colonial projects in the present. So these foundational stories, it's important how we interpret them and how we use them. They can be life-affirming, or they can be the seeds of division and violence. Now, we can draw and learn both the good and the bad of these stories as Unitarian Universalists who draw from multiple sources, but I think that we do miss something by not having clarity about our own foundational story. A shared story is crucial if you're building a mass movement, as, for example, Martin Luther King Jr. did. And also, a shared foundational story can be a necessary help, like a lantern to guide us through the dark night of difficult times. So I want to tell you that I think we do have a foundational UU story to tell and to root ourselves in and to guide us. And since we're lacking a single source, maybe that story isn't a mythopoetic historical story like the stories I just shared from other religious traditions, but a perennial story of how the world is and how the world can be. We, as Unitarian Universalists, see the life of the world itself as a sacred source. That means on the personal level, our own lives can be studied like a sacred text to guide us in living the good life. And on the communal and societal and ecological level, society and history and nature are the sacred texts that we can study. That's why I think I subtitled this sermon a UU creation story, because our foundational story is one that defines the world, the way the world is, and what we're called to do in response to the way the world is. Now, there's many explanations for the way the world is. The biblical creation story of Adam and Eve is one that emphasizes the shortcomings of human nature, especially in its most popular interpretation that is foundational for much of Christendom. Our UU story, I'd like to propose, also features a garden. But in our creation story, there is not an exile into a barren world of hardship. And therefore, no need for a messianic sacrificial lamb to be offered up to a vengeful deity. A deity I won't even give the honor of being called God. There is, in our UU creation story, no need for that sacrifice for us to earn our way back into some paradisical garden. In our creation story, the garden is here, always in potential. We affirm that this is a good world, a good earth. In that way, our UU creation story shares more with the 7 days creation story, also found in the Bible, where at the end of each day, the world is pronounced good. And on the day that humans are created, even named very good. The world in our creation story is good, only unfinished. And humans are good, just unfinished also. We haven't been exiled from the garden. We're helping to make the world a garden. This story, I believe, is rooted in two truths at the center of our UU faith. One, that we are committed to human flourishing. And two, that all of the web of life is interdependent. Or, as Robin Wall Kimmerer says, all flourishing is mutual. In fact, maybe it's really just one truth, the truth of that interdependence, and the fact that because we're interdependent, because everything is interdependent, that means that all flourishing is mutual. We're not going to flourish unless everyone is flourishing. That's a different story than the story we sometimes hear, a story of a zero-sum gain where some get ahead by getting it over on others, by oppressing and exploiting others. But I think it's not true to how reality works. I think it is true, and our UU faith affirms that it's true that all flourishing is mutual. A garden, as Ross Gay writes, shows us no matter how hard you try, no matter how much you earn or stash or hoard or bunker up, no matter even your fleet of starships, you will never be self-sufficient or independent because nothing living is. He continues with a litany saying, neither sycamore nor kelp nor bacteria nor bald eagle nor coral nor dandelion nor orca nor mosquito nor leopard nor chestnut nor squash nor vine borer nor deer tick nor billionaire nor leech nor cobra nor algae nor moral nor kudzu nor tree frog nor ficus nor moose nor multiflora rose, nor orangutan, nor palm tree, nor mason bee, nor you, nor me. The most salient feature of living is that we cannot survive without help. Like a garden, like a thriving ecosystem in an interdependent world, on an interdependent earth, we need diversity for all to flourish. Take the wolves out of Yellowstone and the whole thing falls apart. Same with the beavers, the trees, the undergrowth, the deer, the streams. And we learn this truth from the sacred story of the world, from the sacred story of the earth. It's all around us. Again, I look to Ross Gay, speaking again about gardening. He says, I put in the seed. The rain and sun brought them up. The pollinators caroused the flowers into seeds. The birds gobbled the seeds into more plants, and on and on and on. If we pay attention in a garden, we notice that it's constant, this sharing. It's constant, this sharing. And if we dropped beneath the surface where so much of the garden's work happens, with the roots and the beetles and worms all busy with their dark labors, if it's a healthy garden, we'd see mycelium webbing through that soil, knitting it all together, redistributing nutrients, sharing the wealth. The story of the garden of the world is here for us to study and to learn from. It's here in the story of the Earth's ecology. It's here in our story, in our stories. You can find it in the story of your family. You can find it in the story of our community. But as the song, the part of the song we haven't sang yet, the song Make Channels for the Streams of Love, reminds us, whenever we cease to make the channels for these streams of love, those streams will dry up. This is a good world, but a good world that can go bad. Just as any fruit can be left to rot on the vine, or any garden be mismanaged, any soil depleted with a short-sighted allegiance to a cash crop, rather than a clear-headed commitment to nurturing the diversity that any and all habitats and any and all societies need to survive and to thrive. William Ellery Channing, perhaps arguably the most important Unitarian theologian of the 19th century, emphasizes that we have been created with goodness in us and in a world that is good enough to nurture that goodness if we but participate in that nurturing. But humans do also have the capacity for evil, that inborn goodness can be perverted and overpowered to such a degree that the image of God in humanity may seem to be wholly destroyed. I attended the UU Writers group this past Thursday, and I want to emphasize that part about the goodness in humanity or in a particular person can seem to be destroyed with a quote from Joe Birch, who's a member of that UU Writers group, actually not a member of this congregation, but a member of our sister congregation, Davies Unitarian Universalists, which we partner with for that UU Writers group and for our parents group. You've had Reverend Kirk Franklin in this pulpit a few times this year because we've done a pulpit swap. So Joe is in that group, and Joe wrote this month for that group, speaking of herself, "I do not grease the squeaky wheel, but rather put the whole cart up on blocks to determine that the squeak is in fact not the fault of the wheel at all, but rather of a misaligned axle." Now, I don't know if Joe knows how much that is core to classical Unitarian Universalist theology. That when we see evil in the world, we don't blame the person, we look to the systems that created that evil, and we reform those systems. In other words, we help to make the garden where all flourish in mutuality. Because in our creation story, we are called to be co-creators with the world. We are called to be gardeners engaged in that dance of mutuality with all the other beings and forces around us. A garden, quoting Ross Gay again, that rather than being managed like a war zone, poisoned with herbicides and insecticides with an eye to murder whoever and whatever might trespass. Think about that image of the garden in our human societies. Rather than that kind of a garden, we have a garden that is an entangled system of truly countless mutual contributors and beneficiaries, of which the gardener is but one. Our story, our foundational UU story, is the ongoing story of the earth, including human society as a garden. UU theologian and religious educator Sophia Lyon-Foss, in her book from 1945, A New Ministry to Children, writes this: "The universe has been struggling through a long evolution We are the fruits of her millions of years of labor. Our flesh is the evolved dust of the stars. Our very life is dependent upon the continuing life and death of other creatures. Without the common green world of grasses and grains, we should quickly perish. Our indebtedness is a heritage that links us to all living and non-living things from the beginning of time. The living universe does not ask us to accept things as they are. She challenges us to join in creating better things. She asks us to help her improve. So our foundational story, perhaps it's best imagined as not one story, but a symphony of stories, all threaded through with this theme of gardening, or shall we say, communitying. It happens in the small scale in our RE classes, in our homes. It happens at the societal scale with schools and doctors' offices and dentists and hospitals. It's said in our story about penguins that we don't instinctively gather around to protect the most vulnerable, but I'm not sure that's entirely true. Often we do in all the ways that I just named. And evolutionarily, when we really look at the story, the survival of the fittest gives way to the survival of the friendliest. Particularly among humans, it's because we band together and cooperate and collaborate and make human society a place where many can flourish that we have survived. And maybe it doesn't feel always like a story because it's ongoing, because it's never finished, because it doesn't get to an end. And also maybe because it isn't a destination. The garden we're talking about isn't a place, it's a process, an approach, a method. This gardening is best described in verb form: co-creating, collaborating, covenanting, community-ing, beloved community-ing. I'll close by quoting a little bit from Marge Piercy's poem. Connections are made slowly. Sometimes you cannot tell by looking what is happening because more than half the tree is spread out in the soil under your feet. Weave real connections. Create real nodes. Build real houses. Live a life you can endure. Make life that is loving. Keep tangling and interweaving and taking more in. A thicket and bramble wilderness to the outside, but to us, interconnected with rabbit runs and burrows and lairs. This is how we are going to live. Not forever, but for a long time. May it be so. May we be among those who continue to make it so that after the planting, after the long season of tending and growth, again and again and again, that season never goes away, but again and again, the harvest comes.
And now that we've gathered together in this welcoming and inclusive spiritual home, let us go out into the world, nourished, rejuvenated, and inspired to share our values.